Welcome to the Foul Play YouTube channel. Hey, well, I'd like to welcome everybody to our first installment of Thirsty for Theory Thursdays. And this is when we get a group of panelists together who come from the rank and file of our Foul Play Discord server. And we give them a chance to speak about random theories that they might have. And I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. Daywalker, Phoebe, Obi-Wan Benobi, Zoe, Christy Lynn, Sammy, Patty Scissorhands, and Jamie. Well, welcome everybody. And as many of you know, today is October 31st, 2019. Happens to be the 14th anniversary of the disappearance of Teresa Halbach. So we thought that a good topic for our Thirsty for Thursday theory might be justice for Teresa, and what the state did do and didn't do, what they have done and haven't done with regard to attempting to solve the disappearance of Teresa. To do that, I thought we'd introduce a few topics sort of one by one. And our first topic with regard to this is not treating Teresa as a missing person. Does anybody have any comments on that?
There was really an injustice. There was a lot of injustices here. There was an injustice to the Halbachs. There was an injustice to the Averys, to the Dasseys. There was quite a few, because from minute one, they really zeroed in on Steven, and they decided he was guilty, and they never investigated anybody else. And as we all know now, regardless of what others say, we know that Steven didn't do this. And that means the biggest injustice of all is Teresa's killer is still free.
Right. I think in the spirit of theories, there's a lot of people who believe that they were looking for something to pin on Steven over the years. So, was it actually as soon as this happened or before it happened that they had their sights set on Steven Avery? I think is a good question here. But certainly, this was something that was golden, that fell into their lap, that gave them the ability to really put Steven away when they really needed him to go, just weeks before the depositions of Kosarik and Vogel on the $36 million lawsuit.
And those were the two key players that were most likely going to be held personally responsible, correct?
Absolutely so, because they were the people who were in charge of the investigation, Kosarik, the sheriff, and the prosecution, Vogel, the DA. So they made the calls. They made the calls to ignore the evidence. They made the calls to continue prosecution and to move forward with the sentencing. So that was really on them in many ways. Does anybody else have any comments?
Well, yeah, I do.
Go ahead, Bibi.
They were also the two that the insurance was not going to cover.
Right. So those two in particular had a vested interest.
Yeah, it would have came out of their money.
Yep, absolutely. Meaning their retirement, perhaps their personal finances. They would have been individually accountable, perhaps had they declare personal bankruptcy, if it got to that. And it was in their best interest to avoid that, wasn't it? So
not only that, Big Jeff, not even directly at them. Those two specifically, but the county in general, the lawsuit still would have been at the county, but the insurance company was not going to cover the county, meaning pensions for all programs could have been lost. Funding for all programs could have been lost.
Yeah, that's right. So some other things that they did when they did not treat Teresa as a missing person, for example, when the RAV4 is discovered on the Avery salvage yard, did they go right into the RAV and look for her, perhaps try and find some evidence of where she might have been in the past 3 days? The RAV was discovered on November 5th, right? That's 5 days later. She's still a missing person. Did they go into the RAV to try and figure out where she was, or did they do something different? Anybody want to have a comment on that, Christy?
No, they did not go in the RAV. Instead, what was it, like 12 hours that it sat there, and they just stared at it and took pictures, and nobody went in it. She's missing. Why wouldn't you do everything you could to get into that car to see if there's some kind of clue in there on where she went? They treated that vehicle as though they already knew that Teresa was not going to be found and that there was no rush.
So one thing you might think of doing is sort of shining flashlights in there and taking a look to see what you can see. Did they do anything to prevent people from looking inside of the RAV?
I believe they covered it with a tarp, and their excuse was because of the rain. And then I believe they took the tarp off, and it got covered in rain anyway.
So as they moved into the into the transporting box, that's right, that they used to transport it to the crime. Now, isn't it the case that typically it's much more common to, especially in a missing person case, to sort of treat the car in situ, meaning right there, and put a sort of a canopy type structure over it and process it right there? Why wouldn't you do that?
You'd have to ask Manitowoc and Calumet.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make sense to the 40 million fooled viewers of Making a Murderer.
Yeah, well, my expression is that people don't have anything to hide, don't continue to try and hide things. So I think that's certainly the actions of people who have something to hide, not people who want to have the truth out in the open for everybody to see. And I think there are a lot of examples of things that they did would do in a in a missing person case that they just didn't do here. Would you have an army of people descend upon the Avery salvage yard normally for a missing person case? Does that make sense to everybody of why they would do that?
Targeting.
Again, targeting Steven Avery, right? Again and again. So I think the guilters in this case, would say, well, okay, well, there's a reason to target Steven Avery, especially after the 7th and 8th, when they find the bones in the Avery salvage yard. That's pretty damning evidence, right? So up until the time, so Steven's arrested on the 9th. They find bones in his burn pit on the 8th, and other evidence, including the cell phone and the key. Isn't that pretty damning evidence against Steven Avery? What do we say to the guilters who say, look, why do I even need to look past that? Jamie, you have a comment on that?
Well, one thing about the bones being found right behind Steven Avery's garage, even the dumbest of criminals, let's say car thieves, for instance, they don't go and park the car at their house that they just stole. Him putting the bones right behind his garage, and everything's so close to his property, it just doesn't make sense.
He had the ability to eliminate that car. He had the ability to crush it and make it disappear, and nobody would have found it. But he just decided to park it, literally feet from his house. Yes, it's a lot of feet, but it's still literally feet from his house, and cover it, bring more attention to it by covering it with some twigs and a car hood and whatever else was covering it. I can't remember right now.
Yeah, there was a bag on there, the Rambler hood, and some twigs and branches.
It looked more like an X marks the spot than a here, let me try to hide behind this. You know what I mean?
Right. So
It's
I think the bottom line here is that there's a good amount of reason to believe that that this evidence was indeed planted, right? A murderer, someone who had just committed a murder, would not have acted in the way that Stephen did with regard to hiding the evidence, particularly the car. He at least would have wiped off his own blood, right? If he, we know from some of the other evidence that he was a meticulous cleaner, but can't manage to wipe a blood smear off of this RAV4. Hid it in his own salvage yard when there were a million places he could have hid it. He could have crushed it. The evidence in a lot of ways just does not add up. So there is reason to suspect other people. So as we look for justice for Teresa, doesn't make sense that we should be looking at some other people besides Stephen, because even though there does appear to be a lot of evidence, the evidence itself doesn't really make sense, does it?
not at
Christy.
all. Not at all. The way that
Yeah.
the evidence is found is just shady and suspicious. I mean, the key. The key, the bones.
Very
it's all
suspicious.
There's suspicion with every single piece of their evidence, even the blood. I mean, who drips blood flakes? Who rubs their knuckle up against the dashboard when they turn their key in their ignition? I mean, their evidence just doesn't
Right.
make sense. And I
If
know
he's actively bleeding, why isn't there blood everywhere? Yeah.
Exactly. And I know Ken Kratz is harping on the fact that it's not the key, it's the blue lanyard that matters. Well, you know what? If you have half of a blue lanyard and I have half of a completely different blue lanyard, you and I are going to be able to make a whole lanyard with our two pieces. They're not unique. It's a generic plastic clip. The fact that it fit doesn't mean anything. It's not a puzzle.
I think they made more than one of those.
I'm pretty sure they did.
I actually have. I'm wearing one right now. Jamie, did you have a comment?
I did, but I forgot it.
Okay, then we'll go on to BB. Did you have a comment?
Yeah. And initially there was all this talk of his blood being on the key.
That's right.
And the fact the blue lanyard technically is just plain blue, where the lanyard portion has, I believe, U.S. Army stamped on it. So technically,
the Air Force. I know it was a military event that was supposedly
right, gotten. But the portion of the
where
lanyard,
they gave away hundreds of thousands of those lanyards.
Yeah, and the portion with the key on it has nothing. It's just plain blue.
Yeah. Daywalker, do you have a comment?
Yeah, it was just to go back to something you said a little bit ago. The Avery salvage yard is basically the murderer's dream. You have a smelter on site and a car crusher, yet neither one of them were utilized in the supposed murder. So that's just me.
They didn't need to. Stephen was a master cleaner. They didn't even need to use those things. He did it all with the bleach and the vacuum cleaner and the rug washer. Yeah, I mean,
Mr. Clean of all everything. He is Dexter incarnate.
No kidding. Yeah. I mean, the crusher and the smelter, they weren't. Those are for amateurs. Those are for amateurs.
Even Dexter had trouble putting the grime back after cleaning up in the first place. So Stephen was actually able to put the grime back where other people weren't. So this is the real problem I have with the guilters, is that they say, oh, this is a mountain of evidence, but refuse to consider how silly that it is that the evidence it just doesn't add up, and there's just so many inconsistencies with things like with the RAV4 and the lanyard and the blood smear. Why is it just in that one spot, and why isn't it anywhere else, and why is it flakes? It did really make sense to consider other people right in this. And is that you, Obi-Wan? No, BB.
Yeah, that was me.
Oh,
But go ahead, B.
He's a master cleaner, but yet he doesn't use any of his magic cleaning abilities on the car whatsoever.
Right. Obi-Wan?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the second. There was a bunch of debris that was laying up against RAV4, and there was that box that was on top of the hood. And what I do believe what was going on is they used the tarp to put over top of the RAV4, and they had all that debris leaning up against it to keep it from blowing away. Or that box that was on there could have been sitting on top, and it just, for some reason, I think that the RAV4 had been covered around the time that Pam supposedly found the RAV4.
To help her find it. To help her find it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of people who think that on Theory Thursdays. There's no doubt about that. So as we open up our minds a little bit and say, okay, well, you know, as we try and achieve justice for Teresa, we have to ask ourselves, you know, who really might have killed her. And I think as we've gone on now, we know that over the course of Steven's trial, he was not allowed to name any what they would call Brady suspects, which means that he couldn't name any person by name who he felt had, you know, who had the potential to kill her. Can anybody tell us why he wasn't able to name any Brady suspects? Denny suspects. Thank you. Denny suspects. Christy.
Because evidence was hidden and they couldn't meet the criteria to introduce Denny suspects because the state hid the information and the evidence that Steven Avery's attorneys needed in order to present those suspects.
And just for our listeners' sake, what are do we know what some of those criteria are?
Not off the top of my head, I'd have to go pull it out. I believe it's motive, means and
motive, and
opportunity.
opportunity.
Yeah, right. I was going to say, isn't it? It means motive and opportunity, but at the same time, what means motive and opportunity did Steven have? He might have had. He might have had.
It's really the motive, right? He had the means, right? She was, however she was killed. She was killed. She was, her official cause of death is being a shot to the head. So all he needs is a gun to be able to achieve that means, and the ability to light a fire, I guess, to turn her body into bones. So everybody has those means. But what about motive?
The access, because she was there.
That's opportunity. That's opportunity, right? You had to be able to do it, right? But as you do a real victimology, and as Christy points out, there were things hidden by the state, not just missed by the state, by in ways that they didn't act, as if there were anybody else besides Steven Avery, but deliberately hid information from the public at large to be able to prevent people from being considered. Does anybody want to talk about who some potential suspects are that could have killed Teresa Halbach as we consider her victimology? Christy.
Does anybody else want to? You want me to name just one?
Well,
my favorite at this moment in time is Mike Osmondson.
Mike Osmondson. Okay, yeah, awesome. So I seem to recall that Mike Osmondson had a girlfriend at the time. Did you know what his girlfriend's name was?
Isn't it Teresa?
No, Marie Avery.
That's right. That's right. No, I knew
Marie
it was.
Avery. Yes. So for those of us who read the Casso or have actually heard Earl Avery's interview recently, we know that Marie Avery sort of quote unquote fell a little bit for Steven, and there were some things that went on there that might have been vile, it might have been disgusting, and might even potentially go a little bit deeper than that, but certainly where it was not anything forced according to Earl Avery. So that would be a motive, as Mike Osmondson, who himself might after some of this went by, had Marie Avery as a girlfriend. Certainly his jealousy over Marie's latent feelings for Steven could have been a reason to want to set Steven up, couldn't have been. You have any more comments on Mike O, Christy?
He's just recently come back into my radar. I can't really, I need to do more. He's just, after listening to the recent calls that were released, I just have my reasons to believe that it's Mike with Bobby and the help of Scott Taddick.
Now there's maybe BB can help us out on this one, but there is, there was a woman who was attacked by a possible serial killer, who drew a sketch of a young man with a tribal tattoo. BB, can you fill us in on the details of that?
Yeah, there was a missing girl, and somebody had seen her talking to a guy who everybody at first felt looked very much like Bobby, but he didn't have the tribal tattoo at the time. So the picture actually fits Mike Osmondson much better than it does Bobby when you overlay them.
Yeah. And I think also, Jaywalker, do you have a comment?
Well, you're throwing people out there. I'll just throw this guy out there, Earl Avery.
Earl Avery. Why don't we come back to Earl? And why don't we go run through the suspects one at a time and say our piece about them and then come back?
Earl Avery. Well, you want me to do it or you want to do it?
No, I want to finish Mike O and then go on to Earl.
All right.
And maybe go on to that. So if one thing that we know about Mike O is that he went hunting almost every single day with a certain person. And who's that certain person? Anybody want to tell us?
Bobby Dassey.
Bobby Dassey. So if Mike O was really someone with a penchant for attacking women with his tribal tattoo, isn't it hard to believe that Bobby didn't know about that? Since he went hunting with them every single day? And don't you think that type of escalating behavior that would lead you to, literally attacking people is something that would have been very difficult to hide on a long-term basis from your best friend who you're with every single day?
Absolutely. And I don't believe Bobby just knew about it. I believe he participated.
It's really that really makes a lot of sense, and you'd have to have some type of real, some types of real perversion are involved in that, right? And you'd think that somebody who was into that type of thing would want to seek that out. Does anybody have any comments on that and information that might have got hid? BB, you have your thing.
Mike Osmondson could have also been part of the computer searches on the Dassey's computer.
He could have been, right? He could have been. They get
by being
Bobby
best friends and always there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really.
I don't think I ever
that's
considered
really strong
that.
Possibility. Yeah. Why wouldn't
I don't
Bobby
think
invite
I
his
ever
friend over?
considered that.
Does anybody know whether Mike worked nights the same as Bobby did?
I really don't know Mike's schedule, but it is something I absolutely plan on looking into now.
Somewhere I heard that all the kids during summer hung out at Barb's house while she was at work during the day.
Wow, well, that's a good point because they just had recently got out of high school, didn't they? Bobby was 19, so it's not clear how long he was gone from high school, where he would have been home.
Bobby, I think, was still under 18. Brian was the one that was closer to 18 or over 18, I believe, at the
Bobby was definitely 18. He was just 18 or just 19 when it happened.
Yeah. Yep. So so that brings us up again the Bobby Mike connection. Now does anybody think that Bobby is, before we jump to Earl, does anybody think that Bobby is suspicious in any way? What can anybody talk about what's come to light about Bobby since Ma'am, right? Since 42 million viewers were fooled by Ma'am, what do we have from Bobby? Daywalker, want to tell us about that?
Well, the Billy CD.
And what's on that CD?
Oh, all the searches, all the pictures, all the searches, everything that Bobby, that Bobby went through, that actually Bobby was there for, that was actually kept in Fassbender's possession for 12 years.
Wow. And just for our listeners who might not know, Veely is a forensic computer analyst, and I forget, maybe from Madison, maybe from one of the local sheriff's offices. But he compiled the contents of Barb's computer, right, and he delivered to the court 6 or 7 DVDs that really encompassed the contents of Barb's computer, but wrote a report, a unique work product, as Zellner calls it, that gave a summary of what was on that computer to the defense, to the prosecution. What did anybody want to tell us what the prosecution said about that CD and what he told Buting and Strang about that?
There was nothing of importance to see on it.
Nothing of evidentiary value.
Yes, those were the exact words, I believe. The exact words. And the defense on that now is, this violent pornography doesn't mean Bobby's a killer. Well, then why were you I believe Colburn was actually looking for porn when the key just magically appeared. Wasn't that, they were looking for porn to convict Steven, but yet Bobby couldn't have possibly done this just because he had violent porn searches. That's right. So isn't that just outrageous? That it's porn for Steven. That's evidence that he's a psychopathic murderer. But not Bob. It's just incredible. It is. It absolutely is.
So also very, very interestingly, the 7 DVDs that were delivered to Buting and Strang, which they had, they didn't have the summary, right? For those of you who don't know, a DVD holds about 4 gigabytes of data. CD doesn't hold nearly that much. The CD contained the summary. Buting and Strang did not receive the CD. They did receive the DVDs. Now, it's also the case that you needed special software. I forget the name of the software, but you needed special software to open and look at the DVDs, and that software was Buting and Strang did not have that. Did not have that software.
It was the
and that's the case.
It was Encase software or something like that.
That's right. Exactly right. And they didn't have access to be able to look, so they kind of just took Kratz's word that there was nothing of evidentiary value. Does anybody know how Judge Angela, when she talked about the CD withholding the CD as a Brady violation, how she treated that in her ruling? Anybody want to enlighten us about that? So I don't see the lights go up. But so what she said in her ruling was having these 7 DVDs was equivalent to having the Veely report. That it was the defense's responsibility. They should have gone out and gotten the NK software and looked at them themselves. If they had that, they could have essentially recreated the unique work product for themselves. Daywalker.
Yes, just to kind of piggyback on what you're saying. The only thing I know about that particularly is that software is very difficult to handle. It would have been very difficult for Buting and Strang to actually get that CD that Veely actually got to them. Well, got to the prosecution, but never got to the defense until a certain time. I do believe it was like 19 days before they were going to trial. That they got the DVDs, not the actual CD, because they never actually received the CD, but the DVDs, and it would have taken them a long time to actually get that information off those DVDs.
People think that just because it's software, that it's automatically user-friendly, that it's going to be, you're going to pop these DVDs in and this information is going to pop out right at you. But those of us who've used professional software really understand that a lot of times there's a really steep learning curve associated with using the software, and just getting the information out can be can be a trial. You can easily sit there for hours and hours, or even for a whole day, and come up empty, or even with minimal stuff. Who's got the time to do that? Certainly, at the precipice of getting ready for trial, you don't have the time to do that. BB.
Well, and basically, you're saying they should have hired an expert to analyze that.
That's certainly one of Zellner's reasons that she's had ineffective assistance at counsel, isn't it? That the defense failed to hire the proper experts. That's Jamie.
My biggest problem with the CD is the laws of discovery that are out there. Whenever the defense or the prosecution discovers something, they're supposed to turn that over to the other side. Not just the disc, they're supposed to basically explain the information, at least in my opinion. What they found, the stuff that they found should have been actually detailed, not saying that there was nothing of evidentiary value there. That flat out was a lie. They were trying to skirt board around discovery. That's why they held the CD.
Well, I think that's a brilliant point. And you know who else agrees with you is the Supreme Court of the state of Wisconsin. Maybe many of you will remember. I think it was about 4 or 5 months ago that the Supreme Court of Wisconsin had a ruling that they really felt would help Steven Avery, and that ruling was regarding Brady violations, and a Brady violation is the withholding of potentially exculpatory evidence against the defendant. And the Supreme Court of the state of Wisconsin did rule that it's the obligation for discovering this evidence is not on the defense, that they have to go seek and find it. It's on the prosecution that they have to willingly provide it. Does everybody remember that ruling? And I think it was around, maybe it was a little bit longer than that, but it was certainly around the turn of the new year. You can find videos on that on various YouTubers channels, because people felt that was a big deal for Steven. So certainly withholding that. What anything else about Bobby that gets everybody uncomfortable? What about his story that he gave at trial? Anybody want to make a comment on that, Christy?
His story is utter bull. I mean, and we have documented black and white proof that it's bull. According to Bobby, he's the only one home, and he was asleep all day. We know from the Veely CD that that's just not the case. Bobby did not sleep that day much at all. We know that Teresa called the answering machine. He says that he was sound asleep and he didn't hear it. We're pretty sure that's not true. He says that he never saw her leave the property, when now he says he did. There's just a lot of inconsistencies with him. Everything out of his mouth, it's changed. Nothing out of his mouth has ever been consistent.
Patty, I saw that you had a comment.
Yes, I did. I just think that Bobby and Mike were best friends. I think they probably did a lot of things together, and I think that Mike probably knew what Bobby was looking at on the computer, because I'm sure that they spent a lot of time together. That's what best friends do. I think they were both sickos, and I think that just the searches that he did on his computer, whether he found stuff or not, the stuff he was looking for, oh my God. And I think that if Teresa Halbach is dead, I think those two guys had a lot to do with it, and I think Scott helped them clean it up. That's what I think. I think they
Are we
killed
thirsty
her.
for theory, guys, or what?
I mean, that's what I think.
I wasn't there. I don't know, and I think that's as viable as a theory
either.
of any other.
I am obsessed.
So are we. Who else will be making a podcast about this besides being obsessed themselves? You gonna have another comment, Christy?
Yeah, I just want to point out that not only were they best friends, they're still best friends. I have absolutely stalked the Facebook pages, and I have pictures of them all still together as recently as last summer.
Wow. We know, just for those of us who don't know, we know that Mike has moved to Illinois and Bobby still lives in Manitowoc County. So if they're keeping together, they're keeping together from afar. I mean, I have a lot of friends too that live far away, and they're taking the opportunities to get together, and that says something, right? Because it's hard to keep up a friendship over that many miles.
It absolutely is. I moved 1,200 miles away from my friends. I know how hard it is to keep up with that, but you definitely put forth the effort. And those two are still friends. And
Wow.
I don't know. I feel like they have a secret. I feel like they have a couple secrets.
I think that's a very viable theory. So, anything else on Bobby's statements or timeline that upsets anybody? Did anybody hear his 2017 interview?
No.
Want to point out any of the lies that he talked, misstatements that he said in that interview? Anyone?
I can't really point
Obi-Wan.
them.
The one that
Oh,
I
sure.
have a problem with is the one where Jay Buting caught him on. Well, caught Kratz in the process of committing is he was going to have Bobby testify and lie under oath about a conversation between Michael and Steven Avery about I believe it was
deer.
burying of the body.
Yep. And, so
And,
when did Mike O say that conversation took place?
The 10th, I believe. The 10th.
Anybody want to tell us where Steven Avery was on the 10th of October?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was on the phone with Dolores from the Calumet County Jail.
That's right. He was
I'm
arrested
pretty
on
sure
the 9th,
I can
wasn't
prove that.
So where does that put Bobby and Mike O's story, Obi?
Fabricated lie, I believe.
Yeah, it's just not true. And you know what? And I love your point, because there's the subtlety of it, that it was actually Mike O who claims to have heard Steven say, "Want to help bury a body." Kratz tried to put it on Bobby to avoid having to call Mike O during the trial. Mike O was not a subpoenaed witness at trial at all. So where's his testimony? He certainly a viable suspect, had as much means, motive, and opportunity as Steven did.
I often wonder what would have happened had Jared Buting waited to present that to the judge to where he was testifying to false testimony. Like, what would have happened had he not called Kratz and the judge back into the chambers and discussed this? What would have happened after that if he would have caught him in the act, perpetrating the act?
Well, I think Judge Willis had the same eye toward wrongdoing by the state as Mr. Magoo had. So that's my opinion on that. So I'm not sure it would have made much of a difference, but certainly
probably would have been
legal tactic.
He probably would have seen no relevance in it, I bet.
Yeah. You got a comment on that, Patty?
Yeah, I was remembering that whole conversation that Bobby had with, I don't know, was it Fassbender or Wiegert? And it was, they just seemed like they were friends. It didn't seem like he was investigating. It seemed like they were having a conversation between friends. It just seemed too casual, like he wanted it, I don't know.
Is that the 2017 one?
It was a setup. Yeah, it just seemed like a setup for the recording.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah.
I'm an editor.
No, I agree. I agree. Yeah, it was all, and so the does anybody want to say? Do you recall? You happen to recall, Patty, where Bobby said the computer was during the time?
No, I don't remember where he said the computer was, but I don't remember that part. But I just remember that it seemed like, to me, it seemed like before they started rolling, he said, "Okay, you say this, and I'll say this." You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem like that, doesn't it?
We're friends, and we'll go have a drink later. You know what I mean?
Yeah, put the kids down though, right? They were making an awful lot of squawking.
Yeah, they were hanging with the kids. Exactly. Oh, and your kids, and about the family.
Bibi, did you want to make a comment about?
Well, they definitely they definitely softballed him, and there's no way around that. Yeah.
Yeah, Christy, the computer. Come on, tell us.
The computer was in the living room, but we know that it was not. We know
How do we know
from
that? How do we know that?
because these very nice law enforcement agents went into the house and they took a video, and we see it in Bobby's room.
Wow, what a shock! Thank you, Henberry, for releasing those videos of the final walkthrough through the Avery property. I think there's also some video, some pictures of it too that had been released before.
I believe
So
there is somewhere too.
Bobby, we know you're bleeping lying when you say that the computer was not in your room. Your brother Blaine says it was in your room and that you were the primary user. And we have pictures of it in your room, so you can stop lying right now. Thank you very much, Bobby.
Another important thing, he was late to work that night. Bobby worked third shift. He worked 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And he didn't go to work till midnight that night, if I remember correctly. And in his 2017 interview it was actually Dietering. Dietering came out of retirement to do that interview, if I remember correctly. He told Dietering he was absolutely at work on time. Did he not?
He might have. I didn't catch that one. That's a great catch. It was Dietering and somebody else. I don't remember who it was, but it was two people, and
I think
Dietering was one of them.
And Fat. I think it's Dietering and it's either Uyghur or Fat. I can't remember now, but I'm
That's
almost positive.
I'm
almost positive it's that interview where he says he went to work on time. He says he went to work on time somewhere, and I'm almost positive it's that interview. But in 2005, he was absolutely late. And I mean, his mother does the same thing. I mean, she was home by midnight. She was watching Prison Break. She was at the hospital. She was doing this. And we now know from calls that were released, the Stephen and Jody calls back from before Stephen got arrested, but after Teresa was reported missing, we know that Barbara's coming home at a time that she says differently in her initial statements. Nothing she says lines up. And at some point, her and Scott's stories even change. At one point, she goes home, and another point, she spent the night at Scott's house. I don't understand how these people can do two completely different. Their stories are so different.
That's right. Scott Tadich was also no call, no show at work that night too. He worked nights as well.
Scott worked days. He took the day off to go see his mother at the hospital. He definitely did not work nights at this time.
Okay, very good.
If Lily was here, she could help me because we just went through this about a month ago, and it's been confirmed. He absolutely positively worked days.
Oh, okay, good. So that's good that has been dispelled. Okay, so does anybody else want to chime in about Bobby or as a possible suspect? Now, just with this long conversation, don't we all agree that that he meets the criteria for a Denny suspect? That he should have been considered, that Steven Avery should have been able to name. Bobby might have done this. He had a motive and opportunity.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Okay, so should we move on in order of precedence? Anybody else want to name who else possibly that police should have investigated to do this in order of priority? We got Mike O, we got Bobby, we got. Anybody else want to name a possible suspect? Obi, you don't hear from me very much.
I think we can put Scott or Ryan Hilligoss and Scott together.
Okay, well I like Ryan.
Since they were fairly together most of the time, anyway.
Who is Ryan Hilligoss? Who wants to talk about Ryan? BB, who's Ryan Hilligoss? Oh, Pat, you want to go, Christy? Go ahead.
Oh no, let BB do it. She knows more about him than I do.
Well, Ryan and Scott are definitely buds, just like Mike and Bobby are. They're definitely buddies. They spend a lot of time together. To the fact that they're dropping stuff off at each other's house so often they can't even remember what it is they're dropping off or what time of day it is.
And for those of you who might be tuning into this podcast because of a renewed interest in Steve, and what BB is talking about is that on the last time that Ryan says he saw Teresa alive was October 30th. He went to her house to drop something off. He doesn't remember what that something is, and he doesn't remember whether it was day or night. So, some people on Thursdays might think he's a drug dealer. It might have been pot he was dropping off. I'm not going to go there, though. I would not go there and accuse anybody of anything like that. Go ahead, Dee. Sorry.
I lost it. Sorry.
I don't mean to laugh
Why
at
is
you.
Ryan suspicious? Why is Ryan suspicious?
Ryan is
Something about the
suspicious.
day
Oh.
planner. Something about the
okay.
day planner, maybe.
No, it's that in any murder or missing person or murder investigation, normally the police, just by law of averages, look into your ex-husband, your ex-lovers, your ex-boyfriends, people you're sleeping with. So those two should have been right on the top of the list for the police.
But BB, they would only be able to do that if Ryan was truthful about his status in Teresa's life. He only identified himself as a friend of the family. He never identified himself as a boyfriend at the crucial time. He doesn't identify himself as an ex-boyfriend until much later.
And I believe Scott never does identify himself as sleeping with her.
Right, but we know from Teresa's emails, in her own words, that she was having a friends with benefits situation with Scott Blodorn.
And was kind of disgusted with him at the time.
Yeah, she was.
All right. No, I recall that from Teresa's computer, one of the things that the same Veely discovered that was given to the defense was the fact that Teresa had written an email to a friend of hers that indicated that there was a particular wedding that she was going to be paid to go photograph. She actually turned that over to her boss because she didn't want to go to that wedding because Ryan was there. And Ryan was just making her sick. Does anybody remember that?
I do.
Yeah.
And Tom Pierce also wrote an affidavit confirming that. Tom Pierce being the boss.
Was it Ryan? I thought it was the DJ that was going to do the wedding.
No, he was. It was Ryan. Ryan was. It was a friend's wedding, and Ryan was the reason of the wedding. Wasn't the DJ somebody that was calling her Somebody was calling her repeatedly.
I don't know that they've ever actually. What I thought was that somebody was. The only person who really had the number of calls to her was Ryan to fit that bill. But who knows? In somebody's minds, once every 2 weeks could be. Calling them off in an aggravating way. So I don't know that we're actually to the bottom of who that was.
Well, according to Tom Pierce said that there were several people that were calling her and harassing her. Not just one person, several.
Well, I think it on MAM1, actually, I think Ryan Hilligas says that they dated earlier in life, but they were just friends now.
Correct, but he never told law enforcement. That was not disclosed on November 3rd of 2005 when it should have been. That was not disclosed any time until after Steven was arrested. Till they set their... Right. Ryan Hilligas never identified... It was asked of him at trial. I don't remember the exact wording and I don't have the transcripts in front of me, but I believe it's Strang who questions him and it says, what's your relationship? Did you tell law enforcement this? And he says, no, I don't think so. He never told law enforcement he was her boyfriend until much later. Ex-boyfriend.
Could I say something here on this real quick? This is on page 3 of the CASA report. It says that Scott Blodorn and Teresa's parents were met with Wiegert at Teresa's home, and that they both said that Teresa did not have a current boyfriend or any recent ex-boyfriend. And that's page 3 of the CASA report.
Well,
and we know that
we all know that's a lie, don't we?
Yes, and we know that Teresa and Ryan had broken up months earlier.
Yeah.
So I guess it depends on your definition of recent.
Right.
The last 30 seconds.
Nope, she didn't have a boyfriend since Wednesday, so nope, nobody recent.
Well, on November 4th, Ryan met with Wiegert and Pagel in Teresa's house, and he said that Teresa and himself, Ryan, had dated on and off for the last 5 years. That was on the 4th of November. And then on the November 14th, he had spoken with Fassbender and Tyson, and that's when he said that he was only a good friend of Teresa's.
Yeah, so his story's kind of he tried to put himself as, you know, with that Wiegert and Pagel, and to be like, yeah, that was in the past, but now we're just good friends. When in reality there had even been this wedding, which was pretty recent, where or this other event where Ryan had got into a fight with somebody who Teresa had come with. Does anybody remember that?
Yes, that was in.
Obi. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
that was
Obi.
it. The party in Green Bay.
Yeah.
Where Ryan
So,
actually stalked her to Green Bay and saw another guy talking or speaking with Teresa, or Teresa speaking with another guy, and he got upset and wanted to
does
fight
that
the
sound
guy.
to you? Does that sound to you like a somebody who's, you know, just friends and is happy letting Teresa live her own social life?
Absolutely not.
Not to me. Not to me. Not to me either. So, what else about Ryan is suspicious? Do you think it makes sense for law enforcement to have allowed him to inject himself as deeply into the investigation as they?
Definitely not. That kid was front and center, and he had no business being in there. And stop me if I'm wrong, but on the sign in and sign out sheets for the Avery salvage yard, doesn't Ryan lie about his name and like write Ryan Killigus or something? I mean, it's clearly not an H.
Yeah, so there is some discussion about that. There's some discussion about that, and some of it, some of it was that he might not have been actually the one that wrote his name, and his name is actually pronounced Hilgis, and the person who wrote it down, who might not have been him, might have wrote it as Kill. So I don't know that that's been debunked, as opposed to it being some type of Freudian self-confession. Yeah.
Well, he said that a lot of people hear his name being spelled like Kilgus, because then he said in his statement that, you know, there are many Kilguses in the area, but there are not so many Hiliguses. And I checked in the www. I don't know how you say
the phone
that,
book.
but whatever. Webpage howmanyofme.com, and there are 619 people in the States with the name Kilgus, and there are 1,017 people in the States named Hillegas. And I really doubt all of them live in Wisconsin. So,
Right. Right. So, okay. So that kind of dispels that myth, but yeah. So I don't think we know the bottom. But Christy, you were making a point in the middle of this that we interrupted you on.
I don't remember what it was. What were they saying?
You were talking about him. You were talking about him signing in to the Avery salvage yard.
Oh yeah, I mean, and he's just front and center, and there's a clipping in Making a Murderer somewhere from like media coverage, I'm assuming, and it's of him and Mike, and it's almost like Ryan's letting the cat out of the bag, and Mike, her own brother, is giving him something's just not right. He gives him a look like, shut your mouth, dude. You know, there's just, and then I mean, he breaks into, he hacks Teresa's password on her cell phone and listens to her voicemails. We know there's voicemails missing, but nobody questions him. He says, yeah, I listened to them. No, I don't know.
Yeah, just to be clear, it's on the an internet access to her cell phone account, not her cell phone itself, right?
Right. I believe, well, I mean, that's what he says. We don't know how he really got in.
That's true. That's a good point.
We can't believe any. I mean, show me how you're going to have to show me how you got in there at this point. I believe nothing. Right. What I do believe is Steven Avery's story, because he's the only one who's been consistent.
And there's
Zoe,
something big recently came out, right? We now know Ryan's alibi, and the alibi was provided
Bogus.
by who?
Kratz.
yeah,
Yes,
Ken
finally.
Dennis Vogel Kratz
Yeah,
said in one of his tweets that Ryan was in Wisconsin with his girlfriend, Madison, with his girlfriend, right?
yes.
Yeah, and he did not have a
When in
job or a
reality,
girlfriend at the time.
yeah, and he was living with his parents. So yeah, BB, you had a comment?
Yeah, Hillegas is definitely, he's done another thing that should have set off red flags. He's injected himself into every portion of this case, all the way down to moving into her house after the fact.
That's creepy. That's so creepy to me. Was he sleeping
Showing
in
the
her bed?
police where her dirty underwear are kept, where her clean underwear's kept, where her vibrators kept, everything.
He had
Yeah.
access to all that evidence that they took out of there. He had access to everything. And
Who
they
could
gave
see
it.
that? Who could see that and think that is even normal?
It's not normal, but that's what narcissistic psychopathic killers do. And that's exactly what I mean. I there's a couple different theories, and Ryan is still definitely a contender for me, but he's just what about the scratches on his hands? Everybody sees these scratches in the news coverage. He has scratches. They think he's involved in the planting of the Rav.
Well,
Some
and what
people
he
think
said
that those
was,
scratches are writing on his hand, but
yeah,
no.
phone numbers written down on
Yeah.
who writes phone numbers like that on the back of their hand?
I have an idea about that, but I'm not trying to defend Ryan. But you know who does a lot of writing on their hand is nurses. My wife does it all the time. She's a nurse, and we will have to ask Kelly that if she shows up
He
sometime.
wasn't working though. He was a student.
Yeah, well, yeah, but that yeah, you need a place to write. Here's your. But I'm not going to defend him. But yeah, so not only did he have the scratches, what else? What else did he have? That Zellner pointed out, even in MAM 2.
The day planner.
The day planner.
Who wants to tell us about that? You want to tell us about that, Obi?
No, I think I'll hand that off to somebody else.
Okay, Christy, how about you?
The day planner, from what I remember, and if I get anything right, somebody please jump in. The day planner was actually a printed out piece of paper from the computer program to keep your schedule. What was it? Outlook, I believe. And
Something like that. Maybe the Palm
yeah,
Pilot organic one too.
yeah, it wasn't an actual day planner that you go down to Walgreens and buy, and it was a printed out page from her computer. And the state's defense of this right now, well, I guess Ken Kratz's defense, I can't even refer to him as the state right now. Ken Kratz's defense of that is that it was printed from her computer, that he printed it from the computer. But we know that it had handwriting on it. We know that there was things handwritten. We know that Kathleen Zellner has investigated this and talked to people that Teresa talked to on the phone on October 31st. And a woman states, Teresa said, I need to pull over, I'm driving. And the information that woman gave her was written on that piece of paper that was in Ryan Hillegas's possession. How would he have gotten, if nobody's seen her after she left Avery Salvage Yard, how would somebody, or didn't leave Avery Salvage Yard, however they want to spin that, how does Ryan explain the possession of that piece of paper that should still be with Teresa or in her car?
And that telephone call was the 31st, right?
Correct.
And not to mention locked in the RAV4.
Right, locked in her car because nobody could get in, right?
Correct.
So what about Ryan's cell phone calls? Does he have any strange cell phone activity that anybody wants to talk about?
Is it 22 dropped calls that night or something? The night of the 4th?
That's right. Some very large number.
I'm pretty
and
sure
he
it's
actually, 22. I believe you.
And they're from a blocked number. They're from an unknown blocked number. We don't know who they're from, which could possibly be law enforcement.
And he later says, as part of the search party, that the cell phone coverage on the Avery Salvage Yard is terrible. Now, as a search party member, he wasn't supposed to be on the Avery salvage yard, even though we know he signed in. So how did he know that the coverage down in the Avery salvage yard was so terrible? How did he know that? Well, he's got these drop calls, but he shouldn't have been on that Avery salvage yard on the 3rd or the 4th, right?
Definitely not. He had no reason to be.
He was riding shotgun with Andy Colborne.
There you go.
He was planting the car.
He could have been. I mean,
Sorry,
if you
I
believe
had
that the
to say
ref,
that.
no. If he was, if you're to
Theory
believe
Thursday.
Theory Thursday, there's a guy by the name of Wilmer Siebert, right? Who we see on MAM, who says that he saw the RAV driven, a car matching the description of the RAV driven by his house, followed by a white Jeep headed inbound towards the Avery salvage yard, and that's the only place you can go if you're going that way.
Here, I'll ask the
so-
question. Who owns a white Jeep?
Lots of people. Somebody named Coburn does as well.
There you
Careful
go.
now. Foul play doesn't
Yeah,
need
yeah.
a lawsuit.
That's right. We don't. There's lots of white Jeeps. And his is only one. So we're not making any accusations here on Theory Thursday. This is for entertainment purposes only.
I would
anything
like
else
to
about
go
Ryan?
back
Go
to
ahead.
I would like to go back to the scratches for one moment and
Oh, go
point
ahead.
out that at trial there's some photographs that appear to be scars on the back of his hand where the scratches were at.
Very good. Very good.
Very
That is
interesting.
corroborating evidence. Very good. So again, now Ryan, former ex-lover, I mean, anybody who's ever seen an episode of Columbo knows that people who do the crime like to inject themselves so they can track the status of whether they're actually be a suspect or not, right? He's a ex-lover, allegedly abusive in his relationship towards Teresa. Stalked her one night to a party, got in a fight with a guy who was showing interest in Teresa. Shows up at her house. She's getting strange phone calls. Does everybody agree that it's unreasonable that Steven was not allowed to call him as a Denny suspect, and that it was ridiculously wrong of law enforcement not to investigate him further?
Not only do I think it's ridiculous, I don't even know how to put this into words. It is absolutely ridiculous. And it is absolutely ridiculous that they justify Steven because he called her with star 67. But yet none of the things that you just named off Ryan doing are worth looking at. How is that
Right.
possible? How is using star 67 more meaning you're a murderer than this guy over here who is stalking, harassing, following, abusing? I mean, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know.
Jealous fits.
Okay. Jealous fits. Yep.
I'm talking about law enforcement. Like, how can you? I just don't.
How can you ignore it? Yep.
How could this? At some point, they're zeroing in on Steven. May have been just premature excitement. I get why they thought he did it. At some point, though, come on, it's clear. It's so clear he didn't do this. How come we're the only ones that see it?
They needed it to be him.
I know.
They needed
But-
it. Right. That's right.
And that's where you get corruptions. This wasn't an accident. This was made to happen at some point. Whether you want to go with the theory that the cops are the ones that killed her, regardless of which theory you go with, at some point this was absolutely intentional.
Right. It
Or
needed to
in
be Steven.
spirit-
They needed him to go away.
Yeah.
And in spirit of Theory Thursday, or the cops helped her disappear.
Yes, there are people that still believe she's alive. I'm not one of those people, but I'm at the point in this case where if she was, it wouldn't shock me.
Can I mention something here
think that-
about the
Yeah, go ahead.
evidence real quick? Just
Yeah,
the
go ahead.
evidence. I think there's like a huge issue in the way that people interpret evidence. The state wants you to believe their own narrative, a narrative that they created to make you believe their case. The reason why they build a case is against the defendant is because they're seeking a conviction. Why? do we have to accept the state's case or accept it the way that they present it as the evidence that they have collected? Can much of the evidence that exists in a case be explained away? Absolutely. I believe that guilders have to contend that the state's case, or they contend that the state's case is just. But is it really that cut and dry? And can the evidence be be seen in a different light, or be interpreted to have a whole new meaning? One could say that the evidence collected could be even biased due to the fact that the state and the prosecution is seeking a conviction by any means necessary. But I think that is a problem. A huge problem is because much of the evidence that we see, truthers, we analyze the evidence and we can interpret it differently in a way that it makes sense, in a way that makes sense to us, in a way that we believe that it makes sense to everybody else. The state only interprets it because they are seeking the conviction. They want you to believe that the evidence that they collected is true, and it's just a manipulative game, I think, and
you make an excellent point. You make an excellent point, Ben. And to amplify that point, the state had to bury evidence in order to make their narrative make sense. Because if there were certain things that came out, some of the things that we're talking about today, their neat and clean story about Steven Avery's guilt just falls right apart, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a comment, Dave Walker?
No, I didn't. I didn't honestly hear almost anything Obi said, so he was breaking out a lot for me. But no, I have nothing because I didn't know what was said.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Christy.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was still unmuted. No, I'm good.
Okay. Anything else about Ryan that we want to get into that people want to talk about? I think we've pretty well established that he was a viable Denny suspect. Here's another possible Denny suspect that's worth talking about. Who can tell me who Bradley Check is?
Ooh,
Christy. Oh, Patty. We haven't heard from you very much.
Oh, go ahead.
How about
He's the guy that was the DJ. He was really good-looking guy, married, and she took pictures. Teresa took pictures, boudoir photos of him and his wife. And then him and his wife broke up, and then she dated him for a while. And then it was more like a friends with benefits thing. And then she wasn't really interested in him, and then he kept pursuing her.
All right. Now, do you recall that Bradley's wife took out a restraining order against him?
I do recall that.
So that
and also
go ahead, BB.
Also, she got called into their divorce.
Right.
Teresa got called into their divorce over those photos.
So Teresa is, we've discussed on previous podcasts how important it is to do a victimology of the victim to understand, what of her activities posed her risk. Does anybody think that taking nude photos, having an affair with a married man, who got so upset over his divorce that his wife filed a restraining order, rises to the level of, suspicion?
Not as much as an ex-boyfriend with a day planner that was in her car.
that might be the case, but we're talking about Brady. We're talking about suspects. That's a great point. No, I definitely agree. Now we also happen to know that Bradley Check happened to text her that day, don't we?
Right.
Yes.
He admitted that. He offered to show the text itself to the person who investigated him, and I think the officer declined the need to look at that text. I would have loved to have known what that text said. I would love to know what phone number it was texted to.
And did she reply?
I don't. That's a great question. We don't know the answer. That's all lost to history.
Well, the
So
reason why
Brad,
it's lost history
yeah,
is because the police did an inadequate job of investigating who the true Teresa, other than this whitewashed version that we all originally got, was.
that's right. That's right. That, you know, again, uh, if Teresa were my daughter, I would be very proud of her. I mean, so it's not that you know that we think that she is living a lifestyle that's to be condemned. But certainly, she was not living a lifestyle that was without risk. That was not without risk. Does everybody agree to that?
Oh, yeah, most certainly. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not, I'm not passing judgment on her. She was probably most likely an average 25-year-old single girl who's been to college and who's experimenting and exploring life, as
She
most
had
of
her
us
own
have done.
business. She was successful. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
very, yep, successful, and a little lonely, and not much different than many girls I know. So, anybody else want to have Christy, have a comment on that?
She definitely led a little riskier of a lifestyle. She led a lifestyle that warranted having the males in her life looked at a little more than they were, a lot more than they were, because they
A
weren't
lot
looked
more than
at.
they were. Yeah. Very good.
They looked at
Very good.
Steven, and that's pretty much it. They looked at Steven, they looked at Zipper, and they looked at the other appointment she had that day. I can never remember that guy's name. Schmitz or something like that.
Schmitz,
Schmidt, yeah.
Steve
Yeah,
Schmitz. Yeah, yeah.
they looked at those three people, and that's pretty much all they did.
Yeah.
Why should we consider Earl Avery a suspect?
Well, in all honesty, it was the relationship between Stephen and can't remember the niece, Marie.
Marie. Yep. That was just for people who don't know. Marie is Earl's adopted daughter from his wife Candy. Candy's
Yes.
biological daughter, not related to Earl by blood.
Well, I mean, in all honesty, that's about all I know. But I know there's a lot between Earl Avery and Stephen Avery over Marie, since there was a allegation against Stephen Avery for molestation against Marie when it was actually Earl. Am I wrong about that?
You broke up a little bit. We know that Earl did some time in prison for molesting his own children, right?
Exactly. That's what I said.
Actually, from the recent phone calls, at one point, Steve and his mother are discussing Earl and that child molestation. They said came from his last family. So I had this big question mark next to that point that I picked up on. And I wonder, does that mean he was married before Candy? And the trial just carried over to when he was married to Candy or with Candy? I don't know.
That could be. Yep. That's worth investigating.
I have no idea, but other than that, that's really kind of. I was just kind of like spitballing Earl, but that's basically all I know about Earl.
Well, there
was
a letter. There was a letter or something that some guy who was in prison with Steve had wrote, where he said that Stephen had said that he was trying to get a place for Marie to move her away from Earl because Earl was molesting her. So I don't really know. Wasn't there?
That's all
whatever.
speculation. Yep.
Wasn't that burnt down?
Yeah,
about the trailer on Xander Road. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
But that was supposed to be a story Steven told somebody in jail. I can't remember the dude's name. It was in.
Let's talk about other things about Earl. How does Earl treat women? Is Earl a womanizer?
Well, looking at Earl, I'd say no.
So let me rephrase that. So what? Earl did some time in prison. What did he go to prison for?
Isn't he a pervert? Didn't he record people in his bathroom or something?
That he only got a slap on the wrist for.
I thought he went to prison for that.
I don't think he did.
No, I don't remember any of them really going to prison except for Steve.
But he did get
Yeah.
in trouble way back for 2 counts of child molestation.
Yeah.
And that's the one that on the phone call they had said came from his last family.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
So, as Stephen, Buting and Strang asked Stephen to write down people, who they felt that they should call out as possible Denny suspect. And he did list Earl Avery as one, and Mr. Magoo, or Judge Mr. Magoo Fox did not allow him to do that because the lack of a motive. But
there was 8 people he listed. 8 people.
And Stephen doesn't have a motive, and that was Stephen's comment. I don't have a motive, and none of Stephen's behavior really speaks to escalating psychopathic, murderous behavior.
I think Buting and Strange really dropped the ball. They had an investigator. He had a list of 8 people. So why didn't they send their investigator out to investigate these 8 people to come up with motive for him?
Yeah. Now,
I think when they went to go investigate Earl, they couldn't find him because he was hiding under the laundry in the house. Remember?
I do remember that.
That's a big pile of dirty laundry.
The funniest thing about that story.
No.
The funniest thing about that story is his hiding succeeded. Because if you hear in his interview, that, oh yeah, that you're lucky that you hid from us the day before because this other person was with us. And that's another interesting.
Have a whole bunch of clothes on, and they just thought it was a big pile of laundry.
It's true. It's true. It's a true story.
I don't know. That's
the interesting thing. If you read the Casso, the Earl Avery recording was just released, within the last month. And if you read the Casso, the police say in the report Earl Avery didn't talk. Right? Earl refused to talk. Yet we have this recorded interview. More Casso lies. Thank you very much. Does anybody know what Earl was doing a few days before the murder with regard to his equipment, his heavy equipment?
Wasn't he pulling trees out?
Is pulling trees out by the roots, right? He's going to replant them. Anybody know the success of replanting trees that you pull up by the roots in October in Wisconsin?
Late October, early November. Not very good.
Not very good. So where might be a good place to put them if you're not going to put them in the garden? On top of a round 4? Yeah. Did anybody investigate that, whether or not those might have been the same trees? Anybody look at those trees to see if they had any marks of, some type of piece of farm equipment or heavy equipment on them? Anybody look at that?
No, but millions of people are going to go back and look
bother?
at those pictures in a couple hours.
Yeah, why bother? Why bother, right? Because we know who did it, and it wasn't Earl. Where those trees came from, who knows? Who cares, right? Not necessary.
It wouldn't have helped them any if it was Earl. It wouldn't have helped them any at all. It had to be Steve.
Yeah.
Before we move on from Earl, I just want to say it does not appear he's been married to anybody but Candy, but that does not mean that he didn't have that he wasn't involved with it doesn't mean there wasn't another family. It just means he was never married. I can't find any record of any marriage except Candy with Earl.
I didn't believe so, but I went back and replayed that portion.
Oh no,
I
heard it.
Call.
I heard it too. I have it marked too. But it doesn't mean it just does. It means they weren't married. It doesn't mean he didn't have some long-term
He could have been
girlfriend
living
that had some kids. Yeah,
he could have been
anything.
Yeah.
So I guess our last suspect, and we are running a little bit long, longer than I thought we'd go on this topic. But what about Chuck Avery? Stephen listed him as a possible suspect as well. Do you think he deserved to be a Denny, and why?
Everybody deserved to be a Denny.
How did Chuck behave? What of? Go ahead. Let the viewers know.
I think he's a little sketchy. I think that there's a very recent phone call that we have labeled call number 13, I believe it is, where he talks to Steven, and I just feel this. He feels guilty about something. I don't know if he feels guilty because he doesn't know what to think. I don't know if he feels guilty because he knows something. There's definitely a guilt in his voice.
Well, yeah,
Well,
you know what strikes me about about that particular call and subsequent calls, and we're talking about, by the way, the recently released calls. I think it was Kaboom Bam Boom, Kaboom Blam Boom, that FOIA those calls. You can find them on the Foul Play channel, thanks to Zoe, who worked day and night to try and figure out how to get those calls played, because they were in a strange format.
it's worked all week.
Worked on right, and
Worked all
played
week
hooky from work. Played hooky from work to be able to do it right.
to record them, upload them, and
yeah,
everything. Yes, she's worked tirelessly
exactly.
at it.
So what strikes me about those calls with Chuck is that Steven, we know Steven is, he's very jealous about his fiancee Jody, but he doesn't want Chuck anywhere near Jody. And I think that that's probably a multifaceted reason, with one of those reasons being that he's afraid that Chuck and Jody will hook up for some reason. But I gotta believe that Steven knows what Chucky is, right? And there's a lot of documentation in the castle about some very strange behavior towards women of Chucky. We know he choked his own wife with a phone cord. We know that he harassed female visitors to the Avery salvage yard. He left $50 at one of their houses. And said, "Here, go. Was it 50 or 100? Do you remember? I think it was 50.
I think it was
And
50
flowers.
because I think I remember thinking something about the cheap bastard couldn't even leave 100 or something. I'm pretty sure it was 50. I'm pretty sure it was 50.
Well, there's been a lot of inflation since 2005.
There has been.
Really judge him on it. So, but yeah, isn't that weird? I mean, you want to meet a girl and you leave $50. I mean, that's maybe what you do in a bordello, but not to somebody who you might like to are interested in, might like to have dinner with. Here's $50. That's a little strange.
I think he left a bouquet of flowers on somebody's porch too.
Yeah. Now, do you know if he had to drive by a cemetery on the way to that girl's house? By any chance?
Maybe.
Did they say auntie that flowers?
There also was some other sketchy talk about him getting a cassette out of some girl's car that had passed away and him being obsessed with playing it. I don't know where I heard that at. I don't know if that's factual.
I thought that was Earl. Yeah, but it could have been Chuck.
I'm pretty sure it was Chuck.
Chuck, okay.
Yeah.
I
don't know. I don't know if it's factual. I don't even know where I heard that.
The one last thing I'm going to say about Chuck and Steven is you've listened to the calls. I've listened to most of the calls. Steven is very concerned about Chuck and Jody. He is so concerned and spends so much time talking about this to both Jody in the call that he gets with her, with Carla, with Barbara, with Dolores. He's more worried about Jody and Chuck than he is about going to prison for murder, because he didn't do this and he can't believe this is happening to him. But he's more concerned. I'm not sure this is coming out right, that he's more concerned about Chuck and Jody than anything else right now.
Yeah, that seems clear to me too. I totally agree with that assessment, Kristen.
It's in almost every single phone call.
Yeah.
Wasn't there?
He doesn't want Chuck anywhere near Jody.
No.
Good on that.
No, he does not.
Patty, do you have a comment?
Yeah, well, he lost Lori to Pete Dassey, so maybe he's worried about losing Jody to his brother Chuck.
That's great. We say he, talk about Steven. Lori was his first wife. Yeah.
Yeah, Lori, his first wife, and all of his children to, Barb's ex-husband. So maybe,
that's very strange,
from experience, he's just afraid that, I'm going to lose another girl.
Very good. BB, do you have another comment?
Yeah, I think there was also some comment made. I don't know if it was substantiated or not. about maybe him making a pass at Jody.
Yes, I recall that. I don't remember the context of it, but I do recall that comment. I think we know who Chucky is, and Chucky is a womanizer, right? There's no doubt about that. He treats women very strangely. Is he the type of person who would be, sexually motivated to make a pass at Teresa? We don't know when Teresa's parking light broke. Did she stop on the way out of the Avery salvage yard at the at the office to say, oh yeah, I could use this part. I could use a new blinker or something like that. And did she meet Chuck? Yeah, we don't know. I think Chuck is as good of a suspect as anybody else, and should have been allowed to have been viewed as an alternative Denny suspect. And this is just, again, in this Justice for Teresa episode, we're talking about who should have been much more deeply investigated than they were, right? Whereabouts verified, motivations, ties. No one was investigated to any depth that Steven was. As a matter of fact, many people's interviews were even under siege with regards to that. So Zoe, how are we doing on time now? Have we exhausted Chuck, by the way? Anybody want to say anything else about Chuck? Okay. Zoe, how are we doing on time?
Definitely a creeper.
Oh yeah.
We are at 1 hour and 27 minutes.
That's a good length for a podcast, guys. So what do you say?
I agree.
We close it out. I think there's a lot more stuff that we could get into as we pursue our Theory Thursdays. I think that there's a lot more things that we can get into. A lot of evidence the state hid and continues to hide to this day. And like I said at the beginning, people who don't have anything to hide don't continue to hide things. So I don't think Steven has had the opportunity to hide anything at all. To that extent, the state continues to hide things from the public at large. There's things they won't release under FOIA. There's things they won't release to Kathleen Zellner to test. So with that, let's go around the table. If anybody has any closing remarks, Daywalker. Nothing. Okay, BB.
I just want to remind everybody, hit like and subscribe.
Obi.
Oh, I just wanted to basically, I guess, dedicated to this podcast to Teresa's, I want to say, memory.
She didn't get the justice she deserved, did she?
No, she didn't.
Zoe. She's not making any noise. How did I know? Christy.
I'm going to reinforce what Obi said. I definitely wanted to recognize the fact that today was the 14-year anniversary of her disappearance. It was the last day she was seen alive. We don't know what happened to her, and justice wasn't served. And for all the guilters that, talk about the truthers and how we have no respect for Teresa's memory, Teresa's family, blah, blah, blah. It's actually the opposite. We have more respect for Teresa's family. We want justice for her, and justice wasn't served. The truth of the matter is her killer is still out there. He's not behind bars like everybody thinks.
That was extremely well said, Christy. Thank you very much. Sammy, you have something for us. I know it.
No, I just want to say thank you to everybody, and I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to everyone's theories here and just bringing up some very common facts. And it just proves that the guilters have a cognitive dissonance. It's easier for them just to stick to their guns about this whole story of Steven Avery being guilty. I don't think any attempts are ever made on their part to actually consider this unbiased, because had that been my daughter, that none of that would have been enough to me to put my daughter to rest, that she actually had passed away or was missing or was killed that way. To me, there's not enough information. As a mom, that's it. That's all I got to say.
As a mother of four, I second that.
Most definitely. As a father of two. Patty.
All right. So I want to say, well, I wanted to say what Christy said and what Sammy said. So what they said. There you go.
Great minds think alike.
There you go. I'm a
It was
mom too, and I
extremely
gotta tell you, I totally agree, and I think that we have more respect for her memory than even her own family because they don't want to know. They're ostriches.
Yes.
right. Extremely well said by everyone. Oh, go ahead. Yep.
And more respect than the police by not truly doing a proper investigation. They
we
disrespected her.
Regardless
Excellent,
if
Patty.
even if Steven
Oh,
was their
Christy,
man, they should have kept looking. Even if, they should have still looked at everybody else just to make sure.
yeah. So if any guilters want to tune in and comment on our channel, I'd be happy if you guys counted up. One of the guilters' favorite thing to do is say that 40 million people were snowed by a television show. How many of the things that we brought up today were actually from the television show, and how many of the things that we brought up today were garnered by independent research that was done outside of the television show? I think you got to find the majority of the things that we brought up today were outside of that TV show, done by independent research, and all of those things really pointed at the injustice that was done on this crime. Everyone, including Steven, including the Dassies, all of the Averys, and most importantly, the Halbach. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for showing up, and this has been a Foul Play production.